Uh, Good evening, everyone. I'm Ed Dombrowski, one of your town councilors. Thank you for coming out tonight for our second meeting in a series of community conversations relative to our downtown revitalization. I'd like to acknowledge my colleague, um, Tony Longo, one of our other town councilors, and also Paul Donaco as well. Thank you both for being here. Appreciate it. Tonight is about alternatives, and um, we have worked with our team here at VHB and looking at a number of different alternatives for what has been broken down into 5 different sections of our downtown. And VHB, when they first started, they looked at this large swath and they came up with probably 25 to 30 different design concepts. They, amongst themselves, narrowed that down a bit for us to make it more digestible, and they've now broken the entire downtown into, again, 5 different swaths that they'll be talking about tonight. And within each of those swaths, we'll have at least 3 different designs to be considering. It's important to point out that all of this is working towards the goal of a 25% design phase. And that's important because once we're at the 25% design phase, then we're in a position to go to Mass DOT, present our design plan to them. That's when we work through the approval process. And with the approval process comes the funding element to it. So it's very important that Mass DOT see that we as a community are invested in this project. And we've taken the first step last fall with $331,000 that has been advanced towards this design. This coming meeting in the spring, we'll be asking for another $390,000 towards this design. The combination of the 331,500, I believe it is, and $390,000 will get us to the 25% design point. Now, beyond that, we have been working very hard with our state delegation. In fact, our town administrator, Representative Donald Wong, and I met today, along with our DPW director, Mr. Stinson, met with Secretary Keneally. And Secretary Keneally basically heads up the Mass Works part of the administration. And that's important because we will be seeking additional design funding from Mass Works, and you'll have VHB talking about that a little bit further. But the goal here is to have a town investment that is more than multiple times matched by our state funding. And that's important. And ultimately, it's federal dollars that come through the state and then come to us. So when you hear, for example, talk of infrastructure at the national level, that's the money what we're talking about here. So the more infrastructure dollars in the federal budget, the more that come down to the state and so on. What's important here is we are working as aggressively as we can from a timeline perspective. I know VHB would say we're really working at lightning speed. And we've made clear to VHB that our priority is to have this in as accelerated a schedule as is humanly possible. And so we're doing that. And VHB has been very good at being very responsive and moving this along. Again, the second round of funding at Springtown meeting will get us to the completion of the 25% design. And that's really significant for our purposes going forward. So that's where we're at. As far as how we're structuring tonight's meeting, we have a series of slides, many slides to go through. Again, we've broken this whole area down to 5 different areas. We'll be focusing on each. We'll be going through and talking about them, and afterwards, we'll have the opportunity. We have 5 different stations behind you. We passed out Post-it notes, and if you don't have some, we can pass them along again. As we're going through, feel free to take down some notes about any questions, thoughts that you may have, and then bring them to the station. If you can't stay, that's okay. Leave the note. If you do just want to hand off the note and then speak with any of the VHB representatives at one of the stations, please do that. And if you want to go from station to station, you're welcome to do that as well. It's important to point out that where we are now is looking at alternatives. And again, with each of the 5 different sections, we'll be considering 3 alternatives. You might think some aspects are good, you might think some aspects are not, and that's the whole point of this. We expect that to be the case. Going forward, though, it's important to understand that there are no preconceived notions as to what the ultimate design will look like. This is meant to be, and these 5 sections, the design options we have are meant to be a skeleton or a framework. And as we go on with this process, you'll have the opportunity to offer further input to really refine the design itself. Ultimately, by the time we get to 25% design, we'll have a much better sense of where we are in terms of materials and the like. But understand that for these purposes, that journey is just beginning, and that will continue on, over the next, several weeks and months. So it's we're still really at a point where we're looking at concepts relative to that. Um, Important to understand a couple things. Mass DOT has some requirements. You will see a multi-use path that's reflected in most of these designs, commonly used as a bike path, but also available for runners or even potentially pedestrians. That's a requirement of mass DOT projects of this nature. Another consideration will be parking. You'll see a number of different scenarios, some of which will involve parallel parking, others of which will involve the angled parking we currently have. Understand that parking is an important component to this, and we've considered this very closely. The the issue of parking remains one that VHB has made a top priority, and they have been doing a lot of analysis. And that in the weeks to come, you'll hear more about that. They've looked at how much turnover we've had in spots. To give you a sneak preview, the bottom line is we have not had much turnover in spots, and without turnover, we don't have availability. So the part of the plan going forward, and part of when we've talked about, for example, the parking enforcement attendant, that is intended to be enabling us to free up parking so that we have more available parking, even if we don't physically have more available spots under our current arrangement. So that's also an important consideration as well, and VHB will talk about that. So this is really a multifaceted approach to looking at a number of different issues within the downtown and trying to address them all. We think we're on the right track, but we certainly want to make sure we have all of your input relative to that. Again, this is a journey that we're in the process of endeavoring on, but we're not there. So please don't get caught up in any particular design or element of design and assume that that's what's going to happen. It's just a suggestion. It's just a thought. And we really are looking for your feedback in order to refine these as best we can. I should also just finally point out that when we began this project, we had a certain defined parameters. Those parameters, based upon your input and your desires, have expanded. So in fact, the project itself has expanded beyond what we had initially expected it to be, I think in a very positive way. So when VHB is going through the 5 different sections, understand, and maybe VHB could point this out, there are certain areas that were not originally anticipated, but based upon your feedback, we've expanded to make sure we've addressed all of those. Because ultimately, we're looking to have an incredible design. We're looking to have multi-use downtown. We're also looking to make it safer too. And Mass DOT is insistent that we do things like make sure that parking is in such a manner that it's safe for pedestrians. Crossings and crosswalks are dealt with in a different way to make sure that they're safer. So there are a lot of elements to this, and there's a lot of kind of behind the scenes thought that has to go into it to arrive at these designs that we have. But I think we've had some really good engagement from the community, not just at meetings like this, but also at stakeholder meetings that we've had over the last few months, where we've brought together all different segments of our population to come together and offer their input. So with that, I'll turn it over to VHB. They will go through, again, a series of slides. We'll then have maybe about 5 minutes for general questions and answers. If you could write down any particular questions or thoughts you have, by all means, bring them to one of the 5 tables afterwards, and we'll have about a 45-minute breakout session from that. Please also keep in mind that after tonight, we have a very interactive map on our town website. So you go to our main page, click on Envision Wakefield, and you'll see that it literally is a map. You can just click on any area, and then from there, you can offer a comment or suggestion or concern that you have. All of those comments and suggestions are aggregated back to VHB, and every single one of them is considered and has been to date. So that's a really important tool and a really good interactive tool. So again, this is a discussion that's ongoing, and we appreciate all of you being here tonight. Thank you.
Great. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. It's really great to see a good turnout, and I can't tell you how excited we are as a team to start going through some of the content. And that was a really wonderful presentation in terms of getting people up to speed on where we are. I think it's going to make the whole evening go a little bit smoother for the process. So as we get up, we'll present a little bit about the project, a little bit about who we are and our roles on the team. So in terms of my background, I'm the director of our planning, urban design and landscape architecture team at VHB. So I'm very much thinking about the placemaking opportunities, the events, the programs, all of the wonderful things that we think you're already doing within your downtown and what could come in the future as well. So you're going to hear from different team members from transportation, placemaking, development, parking, transportation, safety, a lot of different things to think about as we go through the presentation tonight. So let's get started. What we'd like to do is just do a little bit of a recap on where we were at the last public meeting. And just with a show of hands, how many people came to the last public meeting that were here? So maybe about half the folks in the room. So thank you very much for coming back. And for those that weren't here, that's okay. Hopefully you had a chance to see a little bit of information that was online through the town's cable access, as well as a little bit of the recap that you're going to see tonight as well. What was very striking to us when you look through your entire downtown, and these are projects that we love doing, is just understanding the diversity of what's out there today and all of the wonderful things that we think you can build upon in terms of the future. If you think about a downtown's Main Street, the shops, the events, the memorials, all the things that happen along there, there's a lot of things that are going on that really make a lot of communities think of them as the heart and soul of who you are. And when you look at the characteristics from Main Street, having things like the angled parking, the median that's there, the pretty generous sidewalks, the different uses that are along the side of it, there's a lot of great things that we would like make sure that we want to capitalize on as well. With that comes the things that are maybe missing. So as we go through some of these slides, I might point out some things that might be missing in terms of what you don't have in town today. For example, bicyclists coming through here, for example, how does that really work? You know, if you want to be on your bike, how do you come through the heart of downtown here? When you look at some of the crosswalks, especially how long some of these crosswalks are here, how do you really try to look for ways to improve the safety as people are going the long journey across the street? And how frequent are they as you go north-south along Main Street as well? Some things to think about. As you think about the rockery, I can't think of many other communities that have a rockery. It's such an amazing feature here, but with that comes some pretty interesting history, the ability to celebrate that as a resource, but also some challenges in terms of how do you get access to it, for example. If you simply look at where it's located here, there are no ways to get across with a crosswalk. It's somewhat of an isolated island. And then you add in the mix about all of the traffic that's circulating around and some of the confusion that I know we talked about at the last public meeting. We're hoping we can show you some options tonight that really start to reflect ways that you can have some trade-offs and talk about solving some of those issues and really make that a much stronger amenity than what it is today by celebrating it even further. When you think about the edges of what we call like the middle part of your Main Street where all the shops are and so forth, we're all very intrigued by how wide some of the sidewalks are here as well. Clearly all of the angled parking, the mature trees, the light poles that are in here, and all the different variety of shops that are along the length of the street here. So when we think about the future and the shops and the next generation of what your Main Street is going to look like, let's spend a little bit of the conversation tonight about how much space should be dedicated to those uses. And if there's others that come along the way, like restaurants, for example, or other outdoor activities, what's the right amount of space to make those things really successful? And how does parking and all the different movements play into that as well? When we switch gears and we look down towards the lake, this is Lake Avenue, looking up towards Town Hall on the right-hand side. The lake is behind us. It quickly shifts into a different kind of dynamic. If you look at where the pedestrians are on one side of the street by the common, we have angle parking on one side here, two-way street. This is the church parking over here. It has a very different look and feel and character and a very different use. So as we go through these different segments, think about why people are going to these areas. What are they trying to do? Where do they have to get access to? And this idea of if we can better connect a lot of your downtown, maybe it opens up a few options for us to reconsider how you're using it today. So this idea of connectivity has been a major theme for our entire team. In front of the town hall, obviously we have the beautiful the upper common. I'm sorry, let me go back. Jumped ahead a couple. Here we go. The upper common on this side over here. Notice where the cars are parking up against the historic fence line that's over here as well, and maybe some of the damage that we're seeing happen to the fence and to some of these granite stanchions there. Look at where the existing sidewalks are today, the generous lawn here and how that operates as a two-way street with on-street parking. We think there's ways that we can clean up some of these edges in terms of protecting the fences, for example, adding more parking in select areas, minimizing the width of the road to make it a safer, lower volume street. We'd love to explore those options with you tonight as well. And we think there's a lot of room on Common Street to make that happen, as well as what happens in the ground plane. What does the materials look like? Maybe there's something special that echoes over the Common as well. We're way down now by Water Street, where the municipal parking lot is, at the very end of where the kind of the core of downtown is. And I'd just like to ask you to think again about how the character changes as you're getting down by where we are at the school tonight, and how the road operates slightly different. You think about things like turning lanes and traffic movements. You think about where the buses are on both sides here and dedicated bus berths on each side, the number of lanes and turning movements, especially with what's happening from the east and the west side here and how congested some of that is. Some of our teams have gone out there on the road and looked at what's called road safety audits. We've understand the operations, and we have several options tonight for you to look at in terms of cleaning up the safety, thinking about the pedestrian, and getting all of that traffic to move here, I think, much more successfully than what's happening today. When we turn a little bit and look towards the east-hand side of the study area, Water Street is a big part of the study area, going all the way out to the supermarket where Shaw's is. We very much think that this is a critical east-west connector as you're going in towards downtown, but you look at the facilities from a pedestrian, on-street parking, lack of bicycle accommodation, really large curb cuts on either side of the road here. We think here, while the road is so narrow, maybe there's still ways that we can improve that whole experience for all users that are going down this area as well. And when we're in the southern end, kind of across the street from where we are right now, the character changes again, and there's some new development that's happening in the terms of some housing. The width of the road here on the southern part of Maine is actually really generous to the point that we have several options where we can maybe shrink the width of the road, maybe put in a median, think about dedicated bike lanes, all of those great things that can really bring it to life as well. And you also think about the users. So in terms of how the downtown proper works, well, there's a lot of cars that are going in and out of these types of uses. So a lot of the curb cuts and the movements and so forth. So are the ways that we can simplify some of the edges to make it operate a lot better as well. And then on Albion Street, what a wonderful street. We've had a chance to walk this several times, and all of the kind of arts and local culture that's along that street. There's many communities that will build upon that as in terms of a great resource, and thinking about walkability, about events. Even if it's really small on the sidewalk, we think there's some really targeted things that we can do to really facilitate the arts and cultural community that's out there today. So with that as a little bit of a background, Trisha's going to join me up here from our team. She's a great transportation planner and has worked with many communities throughout Massachusetts as well, thinking about these issues. We have a lot on our agenda tonight. So we're going to go through a little bit about project overview, a little bit about the goals that we've been talking about as well, a recap of what we've heard through all the different conversations that we've had with many different stakeholders at the last public meeting on our walking tour, all of those great things. We'll show you, as Ed mentioned, there's probably about 15 to 20 different options when you add them all up. We're really looking forward to your feedback on those as well. And then after we present all this stuff, we'd love to spend most of our evening towards the back just answering some of your questions, filling out the post-it notes, and helping us make the plans even better as we move forward. So with that, Trish, you want to join me and talk about the project objectives?
Sure. As Jeffrey said, my name is Trish Domigan. I'm the Director of Municipal Services for Vanessa Hingham Breslin. I'm an engineer who works with a lot of communities in Massachusetts, redoing some of the roadways, introducing complete streets, what's called complete streets, place saving, as Jeffrey said, and also making visions or making ideas that communities have come to reality. I work with the state a lot to apply for funding, construction funding, and design funding for projects that are similar to Wakefield. I'm here also with Elsa Chan, who is a transportation engineer. She was actually the one who did all of the analysis for the traffic operations at the certain intersections. She took a look at the accidents and the crash rates in terms of along Main Street and the two other corridors, but also took a look at what the operations are at certain key locations along the corridor. The project limits, as Jeffrey had mentioned, I think Ed also had mentioned, the project limits have expanded a little bit. It was interesting that the first time that I met with the town administrator and some of the folks in the town, they wanted to take a look at Main Street, but they didn't want to change the character. That, that you have a great corridor, you have a great area in Wakefield, but they understood that there was some improvements that needed to be made. So the original project limits were from Church Street on Main Street to Water Street. It also included Albion Street. As Jeffrey had said, it's a great cultural resource. It's a great area for um, just an area to do streetscape and make it more pedestrian friendly. The other thing that was included was the Water Street parking lot. So we were going to take a look at that also. On just a note on Water Street, what we were going to do is take a look at the signals. There's a lot of issues with the operations of the signal, so what we were going to do is connect the dots. So all of the signals, the 4 locations that are on Water Street, we were also going to do adaptive signals on. So as Ed had mentioned, there is a significant increase in the project where Main Street was extended down to Franklin Street. It also included Lakes Ave and Spalding Street, and it included the intersection with Church and Salem Street. Albion Street was also extended down to Gould Ave. So there was a significant amount of increase in what the vision was going to be for the area. You know, understanding that the roadways have to be reconstructed, some of the infrastructure, street lighting, making everything more of a place setting instead of having it so vehicular scale where people are actually cutting through the town, making it more of a destination, more of a feel that people want to walk along each of the roadways. Also for Water Street, as Jeffrey had mentioned, take a look at that to see what could be improved along there, see what the sidewalks need to be, access control in terms of driveways and making that also, including street lighting and making that more pedestrian scale also. So the goals, what we've heard for on this project a lot is, you know, there's a real need to improve on the pedestrian experience. You know, you have a great downtown area right now, but it would be great to have the sidewalks so that there could be seating areas, or there could be places for displays for some cultural spaces. There could be areas that could be blocked off for events. I guess there was an event last weekend for St. Patrick's Day. So, you know, just ideas that we've come up with to make it more pedestrian focused. The streetscape, you have nice streetscape out there right now. It's a little outdated. It's a little bit more vehicular scale, like the street lights that are in the median right now is really tall. And what we want to do is just bring it down to scale, but make it to a scale so that it actually blends in with the buildings. We don't want to make everything kind of out of sorts in terms of the different scale of the features that are out on the Main Street area, and also on all of the other roads too. One of the things that Elsa had looked at was the safety of the corridor itself. As Jeffrey had mentioned, there was one specific location that there was a high accident rate. And what we did was we had to take a look at that in terms of what the existing features are of that area, which was, I'm sure you all know, the area between Lincoln Ave and Water Street. That whole area, there's a lot of things going on, right, in that one particular block. And we had to take a look at that to see what improvements needed to be installed to improve the safety of that location. And the number one focus is the parking. I know that there's a lot of concerns about parking. The people who visit downtown are concerned about the ability to park, and also the businesses are concerned for the people to come down to actually park. So we have taken a look at that. We've done a little bit of evaluation of the parking in the area, the downtown area, not just on Main Street, but overall, the parking and how people are parking in this area of Wakefield. And we have some summaries that we're going to present to you tonight. One of the things that we do need to do is as Ed had mentioned, there's some state and federal funding for construction that the town will be applying for as this project progresses. One of the things that we have to be cognizant of is that the Secretary of Transportation issued an engineering directive and a policy on healthy transportation components to any project. And one of the things that we need to do is consider, obviously, sidewalks, especially in urban areas, but also bike accommodations. They don't have to be separated bike lanes. They don't have to be bike lanes on the roadway, but we have to accommodate bikes in some means. And there's different ways of doing that we're going to be presenting tonight. So the design elements, as this says, that in 2014, it was kind of a mandate. If you're going to be applying for funding through state and federal means, you're going to have to take a look at multimodal accommodations. which means bike travel. So one of the things that we looked at were different scenarios. Do we have on-road bike accommodations? Do we have sharrows, which is a shared bike, so the bikes would be sharing the travel lane with cars? It would also be shared use paths, which means that it would be a wider sidewalk area on one side of the road, or separated bike lanes, which would be at the same side of same plane as a sidewalk, but separated out from the pedestrian use of the sidewalk area. Other design elements that we looked at is we did look at parking. We looked at parking a lot. So there's different configurations for the parking. We looked at angled parking, and there's some considerations that we had to take with angled parking, especially with the way that people back out of angled parking and then back into the travel lane. There's a lot of concern about conflicts, crashes, if you do continue with angled parking. Parallel parking, what does that mean? That means that you're going to have a parking lot. So we're trying to balance the two. And then perpendicular parking is an option for not necessarily on Main Street, but other areas. And we'll show you a little bit of that as we go through the concepts. The travel lanes, what we have to consider, especially at the intersections, are turn lanes, making sure, because there's a lot of pavement out on Main Street, making sure that people understand where they're supposed to be along the corridor to where they want to go. Does that make sense? So like on Water Street or at the Rockery, make sure that there's lanes assigned for the movement that people want to take through those intersections. And also bus stops. One of the things that there's a few bus routes out there right now, 136 and 137, and they're very important. And what we need to do is make sure that they're accessible for everyone, which means that wheelchair ramps or handicapped folks, anyone that can be using the bus stop. So we'll be taking a look at what the configuration and the location are for those the bus stops.
Great. So we have had a lot of meetings so far. This is where we are in the process in terms of meeting tonight. We're going to have another public meeting on April 9th. So we're excited to come back and show you a further refinement over the next few weeks as well. So just wanted to thank everybody for being here. We're hoping to learn just as much tonight as we did the last few weeks, and really apply that to refining a lot of the work moving forward as well. So thank you for those efforts. So a little bit about what we've heard, and I'll go through these relatively quickly. Overall themes that we've heard, right? So these conversations have actually pointed us in the right direction on many things, about really focusing on safety from a pedestrian perspective, this idea of reducing those crosswalk widths as much as we can. I pointed those out before. The idea about parking, getting the parking right in the right location, and showing you how we can move those around to be more of a district solution. The idea of the trees that are out there and how important they are to the character of downtown as well. Connectivity, traffic circulation, and lighting. We really want to make sure any options that you see address these and really bring it to life in terms of what it can be for the next iteration of your downtown. From the south, so we're now looking at this whole area off to the right here, we call South Main part of the district. Many opportunities to enhance the streetscape. When you think about it from a pedestrian walking up and down this section, it's not really that nice of an experience in terms of what it could be from that whole user experience, right? From a crosswalks perspective, these are some of the biggest parts of your road to cross over, especially getting over towards the rail trail is, the kids coming out of school and going across the street, big things that we can really cut down. The bus locations and the coming in and out of the school and so forth, much opportunity for improvement, and the activity and the circulation, and then just making it feel like it's a pedestrian scale. When you come through this area, because of how big the cross section is, how far the buildings are set back, it just feels like it's almost like a no man's land. We think there's a lot of room to improve the South Main area. Middle Main. Now this is the section that's really in the middle here, where it's the red part, the kind of the heart of the whole corridor. Again, this idea about pedestrian safety, with still room to shrink down some of those crosswalk widths in here as well. Bike access as it relates to parking access. We think there's 3 different ways that we can get the bikes and the pedestrians and the cars through here to have it what's called a complete street, all the different user types, fully complete for its different modes of travel. Parking capacity and safety. You're going to see a lot of images in a little bit about how we've shifted the parking around to be able to accommodate that, and the overall circulation and the experience of the streetscape as well. From the northern part, so it includes from the Rockery going all the way up towards the lake, this idea about the flow of the traffic and making it clear as you're going by the Rockery, how are we really solving some of those issues about safety concerns and the traffic movement, especially at the Common and around Church at Salem Street, because over here at Church and Salem, That whole intersection is absolutely huge in terms of what it needs to be. So maybe we can tighten that up to make it clear for people as well. Balancing the history. So the common, the upper common, lower common, the rockery. Let's continue to celebrate that great history here as well. And then just improving the circulation, especially as you get down towards Lake and Spalding in here with all of the seasonal use and the people that want to go out and jog and bike. We really think there's several options that can just clean up that whole experience to make it much more user friendly and clear for the users as well. When it comes to Albion Street, so now we're looking at the yellow part of the street here. We talked about the Arts and Cultural District, but there's modest things that we can do to enhance the streetscape there, we think. We can add a few more crosswalks because there's only a couple in that area to get people across both sides of the street. And the idea of really better connections as you go from heart of downtown all the way out to the train station. Let's make that a really nice user experience as we go from the heart of downtown to welcome people and bring more people downtown as well. Water Street. So we're obviously over here in the blue here as well. So it can continue theme about the streetscape. It's not quite as nice in terms of its quality compared to other places as well. The traffic flow, there's a lot of signals as you go through that whole area. So maybe we can coordinate the signals and get the flow coming in and out a lot better and improve the geometry. So if you think about intersections that come in and how are they teed up, or they have funny angles, we can clean up some of those geometries. Creatively look for some bike accommodation and kind of think about the pedestrian safety, especially where the rail trail is going to come across, and think about those whole operations in that section as well. So back to Trish about some of the hot spots in terms of where we've really focused in on solving some of the traffic specific issues, because there's many different intersections and many different tactics that we can use to solve some of those.
I'm going to hand.
Okay. Really.
So to come up with some of the concepts for the corridor, we got to look at the existing conditions, within the corridor itself. So based on mobility, safety, and operations. So for operations, we took the little dots on the map is where we took turning movement counts during the morning and the peak hour to look at the operations of the existing intersections. A couple of the locations where we do have some operational issues is at Main Street at Church Street, at Salem Street, and also Main Street at Water Street, and also along the Water Street corridor.
Next one.
So for pedestrian mobility, some of the challenges that we see based on road safety audit observations, and also based on the public feedback that we got from all of you, is that there are long crosswalks along the corridor. The pedestrian safety at Galvin Middle School crosswalk, particularly, where the kids from here, from the Galvin Middle School, would cross over to McDonald's, just the safety itself for the kids crossing. Pedestrian visibility to the drivers, the angle parking that's blocking the view of the pedestrians when you're trying to walk out, from and then people coming down the street last minute seeing you. So the visibility to drivers. Accessibility, some of the curb ramps and crosswalk locations are not accessible to all users. So that's one of the challenges that we also have to look at. Destination connections. Currently at the Rockery specifically, there's really no connection from Common Street or Main Street to connect to the Rockery itself. There's also really no connection between the Rockery to Upper Common, right where the cut through is. So that's one of the spots that we looked at. On Albion Street, there's a lack of crosswalk, as Jeffrey had mentioned earlier. So people are probably jaywalking right now. And then pedestrian connection between downtown and Lake Quannapowitt. That's something that we've heard a lot, that there's really no direct route or an inviting route to come all the way from the lake to the downtown, even if you park up there and then just walk down. And just in general, overall pedestrian experience, we're just trying to improve the overall pedestrian experience here. So for vehicular mobility, along Main Street is really wide. So there's a lack of lane definition just up and down the corridor itself. Angle parking crashes is something identified based on the road safety audit. So people are backing out of the parking spots and then kind of hitting the people who are traveling down the street. Circulation and sight distance at the Rockery. When you're when you're at the cut through at Crescent Street, it's really hard to see the people who are coming northbound, and also people who are coming the other way if you're in the middle of that section. So the Rockery does create some sightline issues at that location. Vehicular conflicts at Lincoln Street, at the signal itself at Main Street or Water Street, particularly southbound, when vehicles are queued up and people are trying to come out of Lincoln Street, the conflict there with Richardson Street, people are trying to take a right, take a left, and also the pedestrians that are crossing at that location, which is more pedestrians than other crossings. So that's a conflict that's at that location. And then the Water Street angled parking at Main Street intersection, something that we heard as well, is the northbound at that location. People are taking a right turn there, sometimes going over the angle parking spots, and then people were backing out of those angle parking spots, can't see people who are taking a right. So that's a location that we focus on as well. So for parking, we took a look at the current enforcement and also the time limits at all the streets along the corridor. We looked at the parking capacity and the current occupancy along those streets. We also looked at the spaces that are located next to crosswalk where it's a safety issue, like that car in the picture up there. If they're backing out, they're literally running into the crosswalk. So there are some spots that are actually located too close to the crosswalks. So for parking evaluation, the parking study that we did observations on Thursday, February 28th. The parking study is to understand what the existing parking availability there is, the vehicle turnover. So how long do they actually stay after they park, and also the restriction compliance. So if they're parking within the 1 hour limit, 2 hour limit, or are they actually exceeding that limit as well? So based on the parking study, we can take a look at the parking improvements to take a look available parking within the corridor, remove the extended parkers. There are people who are actually parking more than the time limit that's allotted right now. The availability for side street parking, how much parking opportunities that there are, to define the parking spaces along those streets to be more efficient in parking. And just parking wayfinding as well to help people understand where they can park right now. So for parking evaluation, we studied on Main Street from Crescent Street all the way down to Richardson Street. And then we also studied the Common Street section as well. We also took a look at all the side street that's between Main Street and North Ave, from Armory Street on the south side all the way up to Lafayette Street in the north. And also on the east side, we look at all the side street that extends from Main Street to Crescent Street. We also looked at the Smith lot as well, just to see what the turnover is and also how many people are actually parking there right now. So parking evaluation, I kind of talked about it a little bit already. What did we study? So we took a look at the time restriction parking areas, the turnover rates of the parked vehicles, how long do they stay, occupancy by the time of day, turnover by the time of day, and also how long the parking duration for the vehicles. So the parking study started at 7 o'clock and it ended at 6 p.m. So this graphic up here shows the time restrictions, and also, I know it's kind of hard to see the numbers that are up there, but pretty much along the Main Street corridor and also on Albion Street, those streets are 1 hour limit parking. That on the side streets where the residential and other streets, they are 2 hour parking. There is resident only parking along Armory Street where the purple is. In general, there's around 90 spaces that's within the middle Main Street corridor. So the main section of the corridor itself here. So we look at parking occupancy. We looked at noontime and also at 4 p.m., which they're the higher demand. So in this graphic, you can see the red is showing the occupancy that's 85% and above. So it could be 85% or maybe it's at 100%. 85% is if you're circulating around, if you're trying to look for a parking spot, it will take you a little more time to look. So we're looking at 85% and above. The opportunities here, if you can see, is the light blue is 0 to 40%. So on the edges of Main Street, on the side streets there are available spaces along those sections. So at 4 p.m., it's kind of almost the same. Albion Street and also in the middle of the corridor is also the occupancy increases along um, these these two streets, these sections of the streets, and there are available parking on the side streets.
And Nelson, I'm just going to go back so we can see what happens at noon and then how it shifts as you get towards 4 o'clock. So this helps us understand how the character of the roads happen and the parking throughout the whole day as well, right? Next one.
So we took a look at the number of vehicles that are parking over 2 hours. So some of the places are 1 hour restrictions, some of them are 2 hour restrictions, but we ultimately looked at people who were parking over 2 hours because we think that, you know, there are restaurants on Main Street. So the minimum of time that you would spend would be probably around 2 hours, maybe a little more. So we used 2 hours as a threshold to take a look and see how many vehicles are parked over 2 hours. And as you can see, there's a significant number of parkers that are exceeding 2 hours throughout the study area. So this shows vehicles that are parking over 4 hours, which is the extended parkers that I was talking about earlier. Once again, you can still see that there's a significant number of people who are actually parking over 4 hours along Albion Street, Main Street, and also the side streets. So parking availability with extended parking use. So we took a look at the total existing number of parking spaces, and then we took also the extended parkers, which is the 4+ people who are parking over 4 hours. So effective capacity is where the difference is 229 spaces. So because there's not really enforcement right now, it actually reduces the capacity, the available spaces by 35%. So this slide shows what parking opportunities there are on the side street. This is at noontime. The yellow lines show, the top one shows the 3-minute walking distance, and the bottom one shows 5-minute walking distance. So within that area, how many spaces are actually available within a 3-minute walk and a 5-minute walk? Within a 3-minute walk, there's 84 available parking spaces. The 3-minute from Main Street itself. And then within 5-minute walk, there's 148 available spaces. And then at 4 p.m., there's a little less. There's a 63 available parking spaces on side streets, most probably because people are starting to come home from work. And then there's also 111 parking spaces within the 5-minute walk of Main Street here. So supplemental parking locations. These are the locations where I was talking about the side streets: Armory Street, Richardson, Chestnut, Avon, Yale, Lafayette, Center, and Princess Streets. We took a look at the total numbers of the spaces and then how many are available at 4 p.m. Within a 3-minute walk, and then also within the 5-minute walk.
So we thought that it was worthwhile taking a little bit of time to go through that because that was a lot of homework that we've done to be able to help characterize the operations in downtown. And what we're finding as a trend in many communities is rather than just replace a streetscape and maybe some on-street parking strategies that are on Main Street, we really start to think about it in terms of a district. So when you think about maybe the great places that you've been to where you want to go to a downtown, do some shopping, go there for an event, thinking about it as a district and how you want to walk to these different places with all of the upgrades that are planned for a Main Street and all of the different things that we're about to show you, think about also your parking and your strategies and utilizing some of these things that are really underutilized today. We'll come back at the end of the presentation and we'll talk to you about how we've balanced those things. So with all the trade-offs that you're going to see and these 15 or so different options, we've actually spent some time balancing all of these strategies that we discovered over the last couple of weeks about how we can better utilize the whole downtown. So in terms of the concept, so this is where the fun stuff starts to get in here, right? So a lot of illustrations that we're going to go through. We're going to start on these 5 segments. We're going to kind of take it a little bit easy, go down to the south part of Maine. We're going to work our way all the way up to the north, go off to Albion and to Maine, into Water Street as we go as well. So Trish, you want to talk about some of the highlights on South Main?
Sure. So what you see here, as Jeffrey had mentioned, is South Main Street. This is North Ave right here. The school that we're at right now is right here. And some of the interesting features that we were able to put within the public way of Main Street, one of the things that we heard was to take a look to reduce the pavement width by not only shrinking the roadway, but installing medians similar to you have up on Northern Main Street. So we were able to do that. You can see a median here and also a smaller median that's down near where the bike path is going to end at this point. One of the features of this option one is a wider sidewalk area along the school property. And what that will do is it will constitute the shared use path. So there'll be sidewalks on both sides of the street. There'll be a lot of landscaping and green space, but also a wider bike path, a 10-foot wide sidewalk area for people to actually go from the bike path downtown area and then to North Ave or any other destination that they want to do. What we also did was we narrowed the intersection of Main Street with North Ave, and we did that based on the traffic volume and the circulation at that intersection. And what this does is it provides a gateway opportunity. What we wanted to do, because what we heard was we wanted this to be a pedestrian corridor, is to actually create a sense of place. So you are here instead of just as a pass through on Main Street. So what we wanted to do was a little bit of access control and also putting in green space, cleaning up this intersection a little bit more. Some of the other ideas that we've come up with is you already have parallel parking down at the school and closer to the intersection, but also the angled parking that's up when you get closer to Water Street. If you make that parallel parking, that the sidewalk areas there will become wider. One of the things about this section of Main Street that we heard was that it wasn't really pedestrian friendly, and one of the reasons why is because there's such a narrow sidewalk area there. So we were going to be introducing a wider sidewalk area, more plantings, make it more of a green space and more of an experience as you're walking down Main Street itself. Pedestrian scale lighting, the tall lights that you have in the median right now, we want to bring it back down to scale so that it actually is an experience as you travel down Main Street.
And one of the other things that I'll point out is here's where the planned rail trail is that comes in on this diagonal and across from where we are in the school here today. So this idea of future trail that can link to the trail that goes all the way down along the length of South Main Street here could really connect more folks along to that whole system as well. So what could this look like as we imagine it in the future? We've talked about having the park that will be across from where the school is today. This is the school property over in here. We're able to have parking on both sides of the street in this location, enough room to have accommodate for turning vehicles, and we can really enhance the width of the crosswalk compared to what it is today. If I take one step back and take a look at the plan, all of our engineers have looked really carefully at all the geometries and the curves and making sure they meet all of those standards that we talked about. So through that analysis, we're able to find out that there are some limited pockets in where these medians can be here. This section was actually taken right at this location. So this turning lane that happens in the middle here actually becomes the island as you go further north and further south. So a lot of opportunity there as well.
We are maintaining the turning lane into the school though, just to point that out.
Exactly. So and then we're going to try to go through these pretty quick, knowing that all of the answers are at the back of the room.
Right.
So we're just trying to give you some of the highlights.
So all of these graphics are in the back of the room. So if you have a question about something, we're all going to be, there's a bunch of VHB folks here. We're all going to be at the table so that there'll be time to ask questions specifically about each of these different options.
Exactly. So we're trying to give you the highlights so you can know what to ask
Right.
at the back of the room. So option number 2.
So option number 2 would be including bike accommodations, but not having such a 10-foot wide sidewalk along the school property. It would be a narrower sidewalk with on-road bike accommodations. We are still going to provide more green space along the corridor. There's a small section where we could introduce a median a little bit further down on Main Street. There would be a gateway on Main Street, and we are trying to reduce the roadway, the pavement width out on the Main Street itself. Sidewalks on both sides of the street. There'll be plantings and green space that's introduced, especially at the where the bike path ends on Main Street. There'll be a small park there, and also pedestrian scale lighting. So it's essentially the same type of features that we're considering here. It's just either you have a shared use path on one side of the roadway or you have on-lane bike accommodations.
So what's the big change or difference in this scheme here? So while we had the 10-foot over on this side here, there's another standard that we can meet by having those bike lanes adjacent to the to the parking lanes on either side there to accommodate a different type of facility for bikes as well. So those are the biggest trade-offs between these two. Both of them we think can technically work, but that's one of the biggest trade-offs, and still meeting the road diet in terms of necking it down at the same time as well. So we're going to go on a little bit further north, talk about the middle part of Main Street as well, and how we have 2 or 3 options up there as well. So in terms of where we are, we're at Water Street over here, and we're all the way up towards the edge of the Rockery on this side here, really the heart of downtown.
So this option that we looked at was, as it says up here, parallel parking. So the angled parking in here, one of the concerns is that if you have that much angled parking, the reason why the roadway is so wide isn't just because someone liked the roadway wide, is so that when you're backing out of those parking spaces, you're not backing in directly into the travel lane. There's almost like a buffer between the parking and the travel lane, and that's the reason why the Main Street is so wide. So what we were suggesting here would be to introduce parallel parking, and that way we can actually narrow the roadway itself. So the pavement on the roadway would be narrower if you have parallel parking, which would introduce wider sidewalk areas and also a separated bike lane, which Jeffrey will explain on the cross section. The streetscape amenities would include some type of specialty pavement surface for the sidewalks themselves, an offset between where the bikes are and where the sidewalks are. And also what we were trying to do on this is you have a pretty mature row of trees on Main Street right now, and we'd like to try to keep that as much as possible. It's nice to have such mature trees. So we were taking a look at that also.
Yeah, so this one gives, as Trish mentioned, a lot of space back to the pedestrian,
Right.
still keeps all of the parking, but it happens to be parallel versus the angle. And the last thing I'd point out is in terms of the medians that are out there, we're able to keep pieces of these central medians to the point that we can extend that a couple blocks further down towards Albion Street here as well. So what could that look like? We've done up these cross sections here. So as I mentioned, if you think about how wide the road is today, when you look at this, what's called the curb over here to the curb over there, with parallel parking on both sides, with a median in here and dedicated travel lanes that meet today's standards, we're able to really cut down the width of some of these crosswalks and give back even more real estate towards both sides of these streets over here as well, especially where there are intersections where we call these bump outs, where there's not enough room for extra parking because we're getting close to that turning radius of the intersection. That could be a very generous space. So when I talked earlier about in the future, if there's more room for outdoor dining, public events, maybe newsstands, sitting areas, there's a lot of things that we can start to explore in terms of the space. If you look at the size of one of these cars, as an indicative scale, there's a lot of room out there to do some really amazing things. Does it all have to be hardscape and sidewalk? No. This could actually be some landscape. It could have some what we call little pocket parks, signage, amenities, all that great stuff that we think this is really interesting about this scheme itself.
Can you go back to the plan view also?
Yeah, absolutely.
So as Jeffrey had mentioned, the curb extensions, you can see, I think this is one of the crossings right now that is really, really long on Main Street. So what this would do is it actually extends out the curb so that it's more visible. The pedestrian will be more visible to the people, the motorists that are on the roadway itself. And also it corrects the situation that Elsa talked about, where people right now are parking so close to the crosswalks that they're parking into the crosswalks and then backing into them, which is also a very a concern. It's a safety issue.
Right. And a few things as we get acclimated to these maps, you'll see some little red dashed lines along the length here. Those will all be on the drawings in the back here. It shows you where the existing curb is today. So if you imagine this area just south of the Rockery, it almost doubles in the width that goes out there for these events to happen and so forth. So back to this image here, where do the bikes potentially go? Because we have a really tight cross section in the middle, the bikes would actually be on both sides, a lane going up north, a lane coming down south, with the proper buffers, because there's required safety buffers along the length of these, but they would actually be up at the level of the sidewalk, so the sidewalks would almost feel like they're a little bit more generous, but have a dedicated striped lane for the bikes up there as well. So it could be a pretty interesting section to explore. But again, very different than the other areas. We'd like to pause and look just for a few seconds at the intersection of Water Street here in Maine, because as I mentioned in that earlier photo, all of the operations when we get down towards the parking lot in terms of the buses, the turning lanes and so forth, understanding the issues at this location becomes pretty critical in terms of Lincoln, in terms of water and Maine. Trish, do you want to talk a little bit about some of these
Sure,
operational
absolutely. So
issues?
this is the one specific location that we actually came to Mass DOT and we did a roadside safety audit. And what that means is there was a high crash rate at this location. And again, what Elsa had mentioned was that there's a lot of people that are trying to come out of Lincoln Street and Richardson Street that are going into the intersection. There's driveway cuts. There's a bus stop here on both sides of the street. Oh, I guess this is the existing. I guess I should be using the existing condition plan up here. But there's a lot of different conflict points and different movements that are happening here. There's crosswalks that are around the intersection itself. There's crosswalks up at Lincoln Street. You know, there's people trying to navigate in and out of the parking lots here. So what we did was we took a look at what the improvements could be at this area. And one of the things that we wanted to do was if you take a look, does everyone understand what this is the base mapping. This is what's out there right now. This is Water Street. This is West Water Street here. And you can see this line right here is the edge of the intersection, and it doesn't quite line up on the opposite side. If you actually stand out there, this intersection's a little bit skewed. So one of the improvements that we were suggesting, and it would provide for more pedestrian and green space, was to line up this approach to the intersection with the opposite approach. So that's one thing that we were taking a look at. The other thing that we were doing was we were taking a look at the removal of the bus stops. So we wanted to relocate the bus stop just on the opposite side of the intersection and the bus stop going northbound just a little bit further north on Main Street. And by doing that, you're eliminating one of the other movements that are at the intersection that's causing some of the conflicts. The traffic signal equipment will be updated, and it's also going to be connected with the signals that are down on Water Street to make it a more capacity on Water Street. The operations will be better. Also, the crosswalks, as Jeffrey had mentioned, we're looking at curb extensions so that the crosswalks going across the intersections will be shorter.
So when you think about funding these projects and think about all the safety and the operational moves, there's a lot of things with some small moves in here that we're able to clean up so that when you're going and saying, look, help pay for some of these improvements, we can talk about safety improvements and operational improvements as well.
Right.
So keep that in mind because that southern part really applies to all three of these schemes for the Middle Main. So let's jump to option number 2 that has a different approach towards the parking as well as the biking for the middle part of Maine.
So this option here, we were trying to, balance everything that we heard, what all of the goals, what you wanted to see along the Main Street corridor, keep the angled parking as much as we can. So in the area that's really kind of constrained in terms of your cross section, just a point. The roadway, the Main Street roadway, actually widens out the further north you go, closer to the lake. I believe there was a trolley track that was down the center of it, and the median itself that ends, we can extend it down and still have the angled parking here. But because it gets narrower the closer you get to Water Street, the angled parking is really causing conflicts with the people that are in the travel lane. So what we're suggesting here is still a separated bike lane that's up at the same level as the sidewalk, but offset from the sidewalk. Maintain the trees as much as possible on the sidewalk area. Widen the sidewalk out as much as possible where we can, and try to maintain as much of the angled parking as we can in this intersection.
So we call it kind of the hybrid. So because of the distance issues down here, we got to modify it. But up here, we're really working hard to keep it as close to what you see out there today and still accommodate the bikes so you get all those different modes. So what could this look? This is more on the northern part where it's a little bit wider to show you. So we've been able to keep the angled parking on both sides, still have the median a little bit more narrow than what it is today, the ability to neck down at both of those corners to get the crosswalk. The bikes are up on the side, but if you notice what's left for some of the pedestrians here, it's a smaller sidewalk accommodation for the pedestrians, but if you add the two together, it's almost what's out there today. But you're sharing it with a bicycle and in a dedicated lane that's striped and so forth up on the sidewalk. But many communities are realizing that they can repurpose that real estate. At the intersections, I think we're still getting a pretty grand bump out at the corner here. If you look at the size of a car, I think there's a lot of room to do some creative and fun things in your streetscape at the corners here as well. But that's what we're calling the hybrid, but the bikes are on the side. So a third option, Trish, let's talk about that one.
We had 25. We didn't want to present 25 to you. So the third option was really focusing on the pedestrian experience along Main Street. and widening the sidewalks as much as we could. So what this would be is including parallel parking along Main Street and then having on-road bike lanes next to the parallel parking. And what that does is it really widens out the sidewalk areas. You can see how much room would be left for the pedestrians along the sidewalks on both sides of the roadway. The pavement, the roadway itself would still be narrow. There's a lot of pavement out there right now, so we would still be suggesting narrowing the pavement on Main Street, and then all of the amenities, the bump outs at the intersection, reducing the crosswalk lengths, trying to make it a safer experience for pedestrians.
And so what that would look like is, well, here, similar to what we showed you on South Main, we're taking the bikes off of where the sidewalk, we're putting them out beyond where the cars are parked there. Just a different approach. Both of them work, but with these come different standards about offsets to cars. So, for example, when you're in this car here, how far does that bike need to be away from the car? If the bikes are on this side, how far? So all of these sections reflect today's standards. And what we're able to do is really technically look at making sure that we're meeting those objectives so it's safe for all these different modes as well. But again, it just means that there's a slightly different width to this. So if the bikes are on these sides, these are the bike lanes here in the road, the bike lane there. If those are up on the sidewalk, it means that this walk for the pedestrian is about 10 feet shorter versus being 10 feet wider in this scheme here. So those are some of the trade-offs that we'd love to talk to you tonight about as well. So we're going to jump from Middle Main up to North Main, and North Main is beyond just Main Street. It's all the way up towards Spalding and down towards Lake Ave and the lake itself, because there's a lot of interesting things that are happening up there as well. So let's start with up at the Salem Street intersection, which is really up in this area here as well, off of Church Street. As you go by Common, you're up at Church Street. Here's the whole Salem Street intersection. That was the big one that I talked about earlier.
So, as Jeffrey had mentioned, this is a pretty big intersection, and when we took a look at the traffic analysis through here, there's a lot of queuing on Salem Street in the AM. So what we wanted to do is swap out the traffic signal equipment, make it more up to date to, as Jeffrey had mentioned, current standards, but also clean up the geometry at this intersection to try to reduce the amount of pavement that's out there right now. Just a point, when we're reducing the pavement area here, what we do as part of the analysis that we do at these locations is we run what's called truck templates. So we actually take a look at the biggest size vehicle at all the locations that we've looked at that use the corridor to make sure that they can still navigate the roadway system that we're suggesting. So even though we may be narrowing the roadway itself, we're not making it so narrow that people can't go on the roadway. The improvements will also be, we're going to keep Main Street from the Rockery up to Salem Street essentially the same. So what we'll do is we'll improve on the crosswalk locations. We'll repair some of the sidewalk features out here, install street lighting, some greenery if we can, some green space. But it's really constrained in here. We just want to keep it the way it is as much as possible.
Excellent. So let's go on to another part of this whole northern district. So here we have the upper common is over here. The lower common is here. The edge of the lake is down over here. This is Spalding Street and Lake Avenue. And we've talked before about the whole operations, the seasonal use, the event use, and people going down and coming back out again. Tris, what are some of the takeaways here?
So one of the things that we've heard from people who live down here, because this is a neighborhood, is when there is an event, people like to either turn around in their driveways or they can't get to their houses or their property. So one of the things that we wanted to do is make sure that we define where the different uses are, where the travel lane is, where the parking is, making it a little bit more efficient for not only the people that use it through events or park here to use any of the activities along the lake, but also for the property owners. So what we were suggesting was maintain the perpendicular parking on Lake Ave, make it a little bit wider. Make Lake Ave a little bit wider. We've been trying to narrow the roadway up, but in this case, what we would do is widen Lake Avenue a little bit so that you would have enough space to back out of the perpendicular parking and turn around and then come back out of Lake Ave instead of the angled parking that's out there right now that forces people to come down Lake, come down Spalding, and then turn around and then come back up again. One of the other things that we heard was that when there is an event down here, that there's a lack of parking. There's a lot of people that are parking everywhere. It's not just in the parking spaces. They're parking on lawns. They're parking at the church parking lot. So what we wanted to do was widen out the section again on Lake Ave and have some perpendicular parking along the church property, just to introduce a little bit more parking in that area. Sidewalks were a concern. There's a lot of children that use this area. There's a playground. So what we would do is repair the sidewalks, but also make sure that there's sidewalks on both sides of the street that are accessible. Right now, they're not accessible. And also install a sidewalk on Spalding Street, just so that when people are parking in the perpendicular parking here, that they will have a sidewalk area to go on instead of behind the vehicles. One of the features that we also are suggesting, instead of people backing or using the driveways of private property, is to really make this a more defined cul-de-sac. There's a cul-de-sac out there right now. Make it a little bit more defined, prominent, so that people understand that if they're down here and they get stuck, they go around the cul-de-sac and go back up again. And this would be a nice area to have some type of stormwater treatment for any of the widened pavement that we're suggesting on Lake Ave or Spalding.
And I think the idea here, just to build upon that, is while people can do that, by making this perpendicular parking versus angled, the idea is you could back out and go straight out. You wouldn't have to go down. It would just be those few people that happen to miss a spot and have to go and turn around, because anyone that parks could easily go back out without having to interrupt that whole flow. So we're gonna there's no sections in this area, but we're gonna go up to where Common Street is. So we were just down over here. We're up towards Common Street. Here's where Town Hall is today. This is the Upper Common, and we're just down over here on Spalding. And note here how we've dramatically changed the entrance in off of Common Street, on how wide it is out there today, to really tighten up that whole experience as you go up towards the Rockery.
So one of the things that we looked at is right now Common Street is two-way. But it seems like most of the movement, most of the people that are on Church Street want to go on Common Street to get to Main Street, and not necessarily on Main Street to get to Common Street to get to Church Street, because there's other opportunities, there's other ways of actually getting to either Church Street or North Ave. So what we were suggesting, and again, this is just a suggestion, is to make Common Street one way. And what you would do here is you're just shuffling the space again. So the Common Street would be one way, and we would reduce the width of the roadway slightly, and install defined parking on both sides of the roadway. Right now, you do have parking on both sides of the street, but the parking that's along the Upper Common doesn't have a sidewalk area. So if you are parking along the Upper Common, you have to you step out into the travel lane. There's no pedestrian accommodations, there's no accessibility for pedestrians along that area on Common Street. One of the other things that's interesting here is the through between Lafayette and Yale Street right now is just a throughway, and there is a little bit of parking here. Here's the church that burnt down, but what we were suggesting here was to make this more of I don't want to say a parking area, but an area similar to Albion Street where you could close it down for events. We would introduce defined parking on either side, but also make it almost like a smaller roadway, reduce the scale of the roadway so that people will be using the intersection of Lafayette with Main Street instead of Common Street. And that's something that we're thinking through right now.
Right. And what we get excited about from a placemaking perspective, this is about the line up through here where the curve happens in the street. There's the center island that you can see, that triangle in the middle here. The other line is way down over here. If you look at all of that green that gets added to really neck that down, these bump outs over in here, the potential to close that down, is adding a significant amount of space in terms of the events and the activity that you can do in and along Common Street by making it a one-way going southbound. So what could that look like here as well? So we showed you the options where it's simply repurposing that curb to curb that we talked about, adding the sidewalk over by where the historic fence is over here, parallel parking on both sides, cleaning up the sidewalk here and making that a one-way heading southbound as well, and not losing any spaces in doing so. A second way of looking at that same cross-section, same area, we have a slightly different modification down here in terms of this little island in the middle here. But if you look carefully in that section here, we think this is one of the few locations where we can actually add a little bit more parking as well.
Right. So this is one of the areas that we were looking at for angled parking on Common Street, maintaining the one-way direction towards Main Street, but also introducing angled parking in here so that if there are events or if there are other areas that already have occupancy, that this is an additional area that could be used for parking.
Right, and you notice that we're taking that from a little bit of the lawn in front of
Right.
where the town hall is today, which is still pretty far set back from the street. Again, pros and cons and trade-offs.
Right. And just go back just for a sec.
Yep.
Um, again, making the crossings at all of the connecting roadways a little bit narrower.
So here's what that looks like as well. People would be heading southbound this way, parallel parking, introducing the sidewalk just so people can get out and walk safely and cross the street, angle parking in front of town hall, and we gain a significant amount of spaces there as well. So let's shift gears and talk about the rockery. And we know that we had a lot of great comments there. I know there's a lot to take in, but you're getting a little bit of insight to all the homework that we've been doing in terms of the operations, the movements, the counts, trying to make sure we understand all the different things that are going on. Right? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just make a summary because, and I apologize for flying through these slides. It's a lot of information to process. It was a lot of information for us to process, but we're so excited we have all this stuff to share with you guys. So the big arrows here, the long and the short of it is, the big arrows here are the major movements through the intersection. And you can see there's some movement on Common Street. There's obviously movements on Main Street that are going through this intersection. And Crescent Street obviously has some movements that are going through to Lafayette. This is a slide that shows what's happening right now with the intersection itself, and with the median here and the rockery itself. So what we took a look at was, okay, how can we improve what needs to be improved in this area? So there's no pedestrian access to the rockery, as Elsa had mentioned. Also, the pavement area right at the nose, just south of this intersection, is really, really large. The crosswalk itself is very long. There's no defined movement or who has the right of way. There's a stop line that's on Common Street, but people are jockeying for position, and people are just trying to navigate through this location.
We tried to simplify this diagram, but this shows you how complicated
it's
all
very
these things that are happening here. It wasn't easy to illustrate, but there's a lot of things going on.
No. So one of the things that we heard from the Wakefield Fire Department is this is a primary route from Crescent Street onto Lafayette for emergency response on the west side of Wakefield. The roadway itself is kinked, and this blue line that's here is what the actual what the roadway wants to do. So what we're doing is we're actually navigating around the island and then going on Main Street itself. The rockery, and I think you all know that, you know, when you're trying to use this intersection in particular, the rockery is just causing you poor sight lines through the intersection, so you can't really see the oncoming traffic. There's no accessibility. There's no connection between the upper common and the rockery itself.
So what does this mean in terms of some alternatives? So we show you a couple here. So this is one alternative where we're looking at Main Street trying really hard to keep its alignment. We talked about that weave that goes kind of up and through this area through here. So note here, Main Street alignment is substandard. We heard how important the rockery was to everybody. We really tried hard to take a look at this alternative, but it's really not meeting all those standards that we talked about. So what does that mean? The road would come along. It does a little bit of a dip through here to get in towards the center median in that area here as well. We're able to carefully think about Crescent Street as it comes across down to Lafayette in here as well. This is actually a realignment in here to try to help the geometric move so that it really feels like a better flow. But in doing so, we're also taking away some of the real estate from the large curb to curb. When you go to the drawings, you'll see that there's the curb line that's out here today. The rockery proper is out here today as well. So we can preserve most of the rockery in the middle over here. We can actually extend the rockery on the south side, extend it on the north side, and make that a much better crossing on here. What's forcing that is really trying to work almost overtime, trying to make that whole operational work there. With both of these schemes, we feel like we can actually close down this segment of Common Street so the flow can actually go through. This could be a wonderful open park, add to the real estate to it, close it for special events, and still make it work. Second option here is really thinking about it from the other things that it really wants to try to do. Trish mentioned that idea of having that blue line that goes through here. We wanted to show you the impact of that from a vehicular and from a safety and a sight distance. That line that nicely flows into Middle Main over here really wants to be at the edge. You can see where the rockery proper is today. But we think even with this scheme, there's parts of that rockery that you can move over and realign, and sure, that would mean doing that. But the trade-offs are really about the safety, the sight lines, the movements, and so forth. And we'd love to hear your feedback on both of those. Similar approach towards Crescent, towards Lafayette, and making that through connection. And again, this one could completely be closed down to having special events in there as well. So two different options to take a look at. Albion Street. So we only have a few more slides to go. So Albion Street here. So we're talking, we have Main Street off to the side over here. This goes down towards the train station. Trish, you want to talk about some of the small
I
highlights
thought
over
you
here?
were taking.
Now, go for it. Yeah.
So Albion Street, what the roadway cross section is really narrow in there. There's buildings on either side of the side at the back of sidewalk on either side of the roadway itself. So what we would be doing is enhancing what you have out there right now. It's a really nice street. And what we would be doing is the curb extensions to reduce the length of the crosswalks through here. The curb extensions could also double as an area for plantings, small pop-up parks, things like that, as shown on these cross sections. Also, what it would do is introduce plantings because there's a lot of pavement area, there's a lot of off-street parking that's out there. Try to define what the public area, the public right-of-way is, make it a more inviting pedestrian experience.
So we're down at the other end of Albion Street, or across where the railroad tracks are over here today. We're down towards Murray Street and Gould Street. I think the big opportunity there, because this is all asphalt out there today, big triangle, is really to clean up the operations, to tee things up, simplify the geometries, and actually afford some real estate towards doing little pocket parks and amenity space as we go around the corners as well. Water Street, there's a couple options there. So orient people. So here we have Main Street up towards the lake up over here. We have Water Street that goes all the way out towards Shaw's. The idea here is just trying to understand how we can get better curb alignment, better sidewalks, do those signal upgrades so that when you're going through these three different signals, they operate together. There's others that are taking a look at the whole intersection of the rail trail that would go here. That's going to be dramatically cleaned up as well. And what could that look like? Here it's a much more modest solutions, we think. Well, we're cleaning up the edges, sidewalks. We have accommodation for cars and parking in some areas as well. And second option, which is really subtle differences, I'll jump to the section, is really about how we accommodate some of the sidewalk in here. The first option had a much wider sidewalk to maybe accommodate bikes as a trail on this side that was 10 feet wide. This one actually necks it down to be able to repurpose that part of the street as well, right? So a couple little shots at Water at Main. So we're still talking about Water Street. We're talking at Main. This is where the existing parking lot is today. This is where Trish mentioned that Water Street on the one side wants to really align with the cross. So we're actually to be able to regain some space around the edges here to really tighten up that geometry, shrink the size of that intersection for pedestrians. And we have several options here that, depending on what you think about parking and those trade-offs and where different things go, there's probably the potential to maybe reclaim a little bit more of that space, maybe for a community park at the corner here, still having access along Lincoln Street, still having some perpendicular parking, so we're not giving up the whole thing. We've also looked at a couple of options where we're actually dramatically keeping a lot of parking that goes in this area as well, if that's a bigger priority for the community, working hard to still clean up the edges and do all the geometric improvements around here. One of the things we're thinking is maybe Smith Street stays open as it goes up towards Water Street. Maybe it closes off to get a few more parking spaces to try to get the balance to work in that area. So 3 sub options in that area as well. So summary, that was a lot to take in, and we realize that, but that's what we've been doing for the last 3 or 4 weeks here. A lot to talk about. All these drawings are in the back of the room. So in terms of the parking, so I think maybe we spend like 1 minute at most on this diagram here.
Sure.
I think the takeaway is we've done a lot of homework to understand this idea about district-wide parking. So if you imagine all of those improvements being done at a certain time, you're coming to your own downtown and you're thinking about mobility, walkability, a destination. Maybe we need to be a little bit creative about how people move through the downtown. All these great places and reasons to go to downtown, parking could be distributed maybe slightly different. Maybe there's a few that we pick up in locations. Maybe you better utilize the side streets. These diagrams really show you what does that mean in terms of 3 different concepts and how we've added up the whole, where does it get redistributed? So Elsa, what's the takeaway on this one?
So based on the concepts that Jeffrey and Trish had discussed, we took a look at the parking with existing parking demand and the data that we collected. The top 3 rows are showing what the Main Street is: South Main Street, Middle Main Street, and then Water Street parking lot. We included that as well as part of Main Street. The bottom is Lake Ave at Spalding, Albion Street, Common Street, and all the side street parking. So first of all, we took a look at the demand, what we have. the demand along these areas. There's, in the middle section and on the Main Street section, there's 148 cars that park there. As I talked about earlier, the 4-hour extended parkers, taking them, and then we were taking also a look at the noontime, at noontime, taking away those 4-hour extended parkers, the resultant demand actually it's 110, so 148 minus the 38 extended parkers, so the demand actually is around 110. Same as 4 p.m., the demand is at 135. And then taking away the extended parkers of 40, the resultant demand is 95 true vehicles that are trying to park along the Main Street corridor. So taking a look at the existing capacity that there's 176 available spaces out there right now. Concept 2, which South Main Street and Water Street parking lot is unchanged. The middle Main Street, where it's parallel parking, concept 1 and 3 are angle parking, and concept 1 and 3 are parallel parking. The total capacity that's available within this section is 153 and 138. So if you look at the numbers, the total along Main Street, the demand is 110 at noon, and at 4 o'clock is 95. And our the future condition, the capacity is 153 and 138. Even if you go for concept 1 and 3, it's still able to handle the demand that's out there. The bottom part is just showing, the demand for the other streets that's out there, and the total capacity, what the future capacity is, and the resultant demand at noon and also at 4 o'clock total wise. The future capacity is still able to handle these demands out there.
Great. So we can do a deeper dive. I know that's a lot, but we know how critical that is, so we can answer a lot of those questions throughout the whole district. So we're going to go to spend the rest of the evening at the back of the table. Maybe you've had some chance to write some on those Post-it notes or comments. We're going to have facilitators at 5 of the extra long tables here represent each of the 5 sections that are up here as well. And we just ask you to think about how these options are really starting to talk to the goals and objectives about all those different modes, the safety, the bikes, the pedestrians, the events, placemaking, character, and so forth. We'll come back and at the end of the evening with a little bit of recap, but please mark your calendars for April 9th. That is the next public meeting where we're going to actually be talking about further refinements to what you see in the back of the room. And before we head out, just want to say thank you on behalf of everyone in the team. Feel free to give your Post-it notes, and the more you can help us mark those things up. You can spend your time however you'd like. If you'd like to just go to Middle Main and talk about that, if you want to go to Albion Street, this is really open house format, so spend your time at the tables wherever you want, and thank you very much for coming out for tonight. Before we do that, are there any quick questions that people have about clarifying things at all? Would people like just go right to the tables and have the conversations? Let's go right to the tables. Great, thank you.